My name is Steph David, and I'm a Student Disability Services Specialist for Hunter College's Office of Accessibility. This is a recap recording of an information session on accommodation processes for instructional staff that was conducted by Dr. Kimberly Palermo, a Student Disability Services Specialist for the Office of Accessibility, and myself. We hope that you enjoy taking in this invaluable information. I think a good place to start is to talk about the Office of Accessibility mission statement. So we ensure a comprehensively accessible college experience for all students with disabilities. We promote access and awareness as a resource to all members of the Hunter College community. We provide services to all students with permanent or temporary disabilities to ensure that the Hunter College programs and activities are accessible. And in collaboration with all departments and divisions of the college, we safeguard academic integrity and ensure that accommodation provisions do not fundamentally alter requirements of courses. So in a nutshell, our office is here to work collaboratively with students and instructors to facilitate a welcoming environment and to also create parity. It's also known as leveling the playing field for students whose disabilities impact their academic functioning. Here's the breakdown of some disability types of students that we serve within our program. So we have neurodiverse students, such as students with learning disabilities, autism spectrum disorders, ADD and ADHD. We also serve students with neurological disabilities, traumatic brain injuries, psychiatric disabilities, mobility disabilities, visual disabilities, deaf and hard of hearing students, speech disorders, chronic health conditions, pregnancy, and temporary disabilities. And we determine eligibility for accommodations based on documentation submitted by qualified medical providers. And in addition to student self-reporting during the initial interview process with a member of staff from our office. Some examples of accommodation types are testing accommodations, which are the most common types of accommodations that instructors might see students asking for. Classroom accommodations such as the provision of note-taking services, recording devices, adaptive devices in the classroom, facility access, course substitutions, accessible furniture, priority registration, providing lockers, and even advocacy. So let's say, for example, a student needs an extension because their disability has infringed upon their ability to meet a deadline. Our office might reach out to you to ask for some flexibility in that given situation, but I'll provide some more parameters later on in this recording. Many instructors ask us what our process looks like to determine accommodations for students, and what's really central to that is something called the interactive process. So our office must collect related documentation from students. So for example, if it's a chronic medical condition, we need something from the medical provider treating the condition. Sometimes we look at psychoeducational reports and neuropsychological evaluations for students with learning disabilities or mental health related disabilities, more so for the mental health related disabilities, clinicians, psychiatrists, psychologists that are qualified to treat and diagnose mental health related disabilities, audiograms for deaf and hard of hearing students. We also accept IEPs. A lot of the time we have traditional students that are coming directly from high school who have received services in high school, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the accommodations that are provided in high school are going to be provided again, or even from college to college. We really engage in a process with students where we review the documentation and go through self-reporting to really determine what the students need. So another point is once students sit with an advisor from our office to kind of go through what the accommodations will look like, they will be assigned a specific disability services advisor to assist them in navigating the accommodation process, but also to assist faculty. Classroom and testing accommodation information is definitely shared with instructors because students are provided with a classroom accommodation letter, and everyone must follow the processes and deadlines to ensure the timely delivery of services. We really work hard to prevent chaos and last-minute requests, and sometimes we can't control when students register with our office. We have to keep it open, and students must get accommodated, whether it's through our office or through an instructor. And we do everything that we can within our power to just relay information to involved parties to ensure that everyone is adhering to their responsibilities in the process. Shared responsibility is a particularly important slide and concept. So accommodating students is a shared responsibility between the student, the Office of Accessibility, faculty, and staff. So students are responsible for self-identifying as having a disability and going through the registration process with our office through the submission of documentation and self-reporting, adhering to processes, and submitting appropriate forms on time, reaching out to our office and to faculty in a timely manner to request supports. And with faculty, shared responsibility in the accommodation process promotes a collaborative and inclusive approach to supporting students with disabilities. And it's very important that this is done in an efficient and timely manner. A good example of where shared responsibility takes form is the Department of Justice's ruling against one of the CUNY campuses around the provision of note-taking services. So one of the CUNY campuses failed to provide timely note-taking services, and as a result, it was decided that throughout the CUNY system, that all accommodations for note-taking and note-sharing services must be met within a two-week period from the time that the student has submitted the request. So the shared responsibility in that instance could really look like our office reaching out to you as the instructor to ask that you please make an announcement to your class to help us to identify an individual. So we will be in touch with you should that come up, and there's more information provided in this slideshow around note-taking and note-sharing services. But again, shared responsibility is about keeping an open mind and engaging in the process and responding to students and our office in a timely manner so that we can secure accommodations for students. Here are some best practices in terms of course syllabi. Use clear and legible fonts, adequate spacing, and accessible formatting to enhance readability for all students, including those with visual impairments or learning disabilities. So what's recommended is a sans serif font like Arial, and boosting the font to 14-point font is a good place to start. Provide the contact information for the Office of Accessibility in your syllabus. Encourage students to request accommodations early in the semester in your syllabus. Students may join our office at any point during the semester. And inform students that you're available for one-on-one meetings to discuss their approved accommodations. Sometimes students don't feel comfortable self-disclosing that they're an accessibility student in front of other people. They might want to maintain their confidentiality and they have agency to do that. So it's really important to create welcoming spaces for students to speak with you privately. Testing accommodations are very common for students to request from faculty in our office. So here are some general guidelines around the processes and faculty responsibilities. So students will present you with a testing accommodation form. So an instructor's responsibility will be to review and complete the testing accommodation form with the students and fill out their related parts and sign off on the form so that students can return them to our office. Alternate dates and hours may be provided to accommodate conflicts, such as with classes or doctor's appointments. So sometimes the extended time might bleed in to other classes, or we have students with evening classes. So we really work closely with faculty to come up with alternate dates and times to ensure that the accommodations are met. But in the vein of shared responsibility, instructors also have the purview to facilitate the exam accommodations themselves. Generally speaking, late requests are not guaranteed, but we want to err on the side of caution and make sure to the highest extent possible that we're doing what we can to accommodate students. Testing hours are Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. And during finals week, we extend the hours to 7 p.m. Monday through Thursday. For any sort of testing information or access to the testing accommodation form, please visit our website. Here are some best practices related to testing accommodations. Create a welcoming atmosphere where communication is encouraged. Learn about the school's accommodation policies. Prompt students to talk about their needs early on. Be flexible when scheduling, including exams. Keep students' accommodation needs private. So in relation to what I was saying earlier, sometimes students prefer to keep things confidential, so one-to-one conversations might be preferred. And make sure that tests are accessible for all students. So what's really helpful for our testing staff is for instructors to submit exams to them at least 48 hours in advance prior to the exam, and if it could be done sooner, that's even better because sometimes students require exams in alternative formats or we need to record the exam. So having ample time is really helpful for all involved parties. So let's transition and talk about classroom services. Students who struggle to focus, have memory problems or visual impairments, have physical disabilities affecting their writing, or if they experience anxiety or stress, they may have difficulties taking notes. Classroom services serve to modify the learning environment to create access to the curriculum. To provide some context for the note-taking and note-sharing services accommodation, our office looks into securing a note-taker to sit in class to assist the student. In cases where a note-taker is unavailable, faculty are asked to please share their notes, slides, and supplemental materials, if any, with the student. Instructors may also be called upon to help identify a student volunteer in their classes to share notes with the student. So that's a shout out to shared responsibility. Faculty must keep the student's identity who is receiving the accommodation confidential. Upon approval, the volunteer will be compensated by AccessABILITY through a stipend, and note-taking or note-sharing services also includes note-taking softwares, and that's something that's also on the rise. To learn more about the service, or if you want to refer students, the point of contact is Deborah Cito. She's the coordinator of classroom accommodations, and she can be reached at ds7019@hunter.cuny.edu or at 212-772-4883. Here's an overview of the recording accommodation. Many of our students have the ability to record lectures as a part of their accommodations. So here are some guidelines and things to be aware of. Please announce that the course lecture will only be recorded for academic purposes. Please refrain from identifying accessibility students as the ones recording. Meet with the accessibility student to set up recording parameters and discuss the disposal instructions post-course. Consult with the Office of Accessibility to ensure that you are in compliance with the student's legal rights. And please be aware that during sensitive information sharing, all participants must refrain from taking notes, including typing, recording, or writing. And this is what's known as following a pens down approach. So our office will sometimes receive emails from instructors or calls from instructors saying that they're concerned that recording the lecture would in some way infringe upon personal freedoms within the course. Students might not feel comfortable sharing information. And for example, let's say within the School of Social Work, we've had some instructors who have reached out to us to say that students are discussing confidential client information or sensitive personal experiences. In these instances, a pens down approach has everyone in the class put down their pens so that there is no form of note-taking or recording happening during those periods, and it's proven effective in addressing those concerns. Students also sign a lecture recording agreement form, and on that form, the students have to indicate that they are not to post the recordings anywhere or share them with anyone. In relation to requests for attendance flexibility, in-person classes mandate physical attendance. However, accommodations may be offered to individuals with documentation ensuring they aren't penalized for some absences or tardiness. So this does not operate as a blanket accommodation, meaning that students do not have access to unlimited absences with the expectation of passing the course, but should extenuating circumstances arise that infringe upon the student's ability to attend class, we as an institution have an obligation to engage in an interactive process to assess what will be and not be possible depending on the individual situation. So if the student is still making adequate progress in the course and providing such flexibility wouldn't compromise the essential requirements or core competencies of the course, the student should be accommodated, and the student does need to document these absences with our office. The student is still required to complete the course requirements, assignments, exams, and quizzes despite being absent. And it is really important that we review these situations on a case-by-case basis and not apply generalizations in how we respond to these requests. Here's some valuable information related to deadline extensions. So students with our office, and just students in general, right, request deadline extensions for a plethora of reasons. But within the scope of accommodations, when students with disabilities request a deadline extension because their disability has impacted their ability to meet a deadline, just like with attendance flexibility, it doesn't operate as a blanket accommodation, and instructors are really encouraged to be considerate and flexible within reason when it's supported by our office as an accommodation. And each request should be evaluated individually, and this is a process that involves instructors, our office, and the student. And in the event a student is not meeting the essential requirements of the course, or if providing the extension would in any way fundamentally alter the requirement, be prepared to provide justification in writing if you're denying a deadline extension request so that we can advise you accordingly. And we can still advise you accordingly if you call us, but it's good to have things in writing should the student request justification as well. It's good for the college for record keeping purposes. And always consult with our office for guidelines. Next, we transition to the rights of pregnant and parenting students. So pregnant students are protected under a law called Title IX, which is a law rooted in sexual and gender-based discrimination. However, within the scope of reasonable accommodations in a college setting, this looks like offering attendance and deadline flexibility to account for mandatory medical appointments or when students give birth. And in general, the protections include provisions and ensuring that they have equal access to educational opportunities without facing discrimination based on their pregnancy status. So in general, we're looking to engage in the interactive process between students and faculty to secure academic adjustments to help the pregnant students continue their education successfully. Here are some alternate text formatting general guidelines to be mindful of. Fonts: use sans serif fonts that are 14-point or larger and avoid relying solely on color for emphasis. For headings, use descriptive titles and a hierarchical structure. HTML formatted documents is preferable when feasible and possible. Ensure that PDFs and PowerPoint slides are accessible with the correct reading order. Reading order is particularly important for students with vision-based disabilities because screen reading software is very common, and the software will not be able to recognize the images, charts, or graphs without the appropriate tagging and without the appropriate reading order. Microsoft and Adobe happen to have accessibility checkers with instructions for fixing these common errors, so it's definitely advisable to play around in Adobe, in the Microsoft Office suite, and check the accessibility tools and check the quality of your documents because it does provide guidance for how to correct things. To continue our discussion on alternate text formatting, Blackboard Ally has an embedded tool that can assist you with creating and posting accessible course materials. CUNY will actually be migrating to Brightspace, which is a very accessible application, so super excited about that. We'll learn more as the rollout begins to happen within CUNY, but for now, Blackboard Ally is the premier tool for creating accessible materials. There is on this slide information and a hyperlink leading to a remote training on Blackboard Ally, in addition to some best practices for creating PDF and Microsoft Office documents. In general, should you have any questions about alternate text formatting, please consult with the Faculty Development Resource ASSERT, Academic Center for Excellence in Research and Teaching, and our office as needed for further guidance. So here are some best practices for working with visually impaired students. Provide text materials in an accessible format such as HTML, accessible PDFs, and in large print. Secure recorded lectures and shared notes in collaboration with our office. Coordinate with our office to acquire adaptive equipment for labs. Ensure that visual content is described. Always ask before guiding a student. And help with filling out inaccessible forms as needed. So something that happens sometimes on campus is that when certain personnel hears that a student has a disability, they automatically refer the student back to our office for assistance with filling out forms. If you happen to be working with a student directly and you notice that there is a form to work on, let's say it's the testing and accommodation form, it is perfectly okay for you, and in the vein of shared responsibility, it's perfectly okay for you to work with the student on filling out the form together if it's not something that they can fill out themselves in that given moment. Here are some best practices for working with deaf and hard of hearing students. Please caption all media prior to presenting it to your class, and if you need assistance to do that, please reach out to our office. Address the students directly, not their sign language interpreter. Refer students to the Rockowitz Writing Center if needed for writing improvement. So American Sign Language and English are not the same language, even though there are some similarities. So if you identify in a student's reading that their word order seems out of place, maybe you want to refer the student, as you would any student, to the Rockowitz Writing Center. Speak at a normal volume and pace unless the student or interpreter requests otherwise. Encourage students to take turns speaking. So that strategy is particularly helpful because when students are speaking over each other, it's hard for the interpreter to interpret, but it's also hard for the student, let's say a hard of hearing student, to kind of disseminate and pick apart the sounds coming from all different directions. So it can be very distracting and can infringe upon the learning. So it's just something to be mindful of. Here are some best practices related to communication. Meet individually with students to address issues or accommodation needs. Keep the Office of Accessibility Student Status confidential. Avoid asking students to disclose their disability or documentation. Request students to connect you with their disability services advisor, and notify our office promptly of any questions or concerns for early intervention. So one of the questions that came up during the initial presentation was related to a student that was sending an instructor their medical documentation instead of their accommodation letter, and both parties were unsure of how the testing process worked to receive accommodations. This is a perfect example for when it is necessary for our office to be looped in so that we can clarify information in a timely manner and help to really resolve outstanding issues collaboratively. On the PowerPoint slides, there were a number of resources through hyperlinks that were shared with attendees, such as how to caption videos, how to create accessible Microsoft Word documents and PDFs, accessible emails, and some information regarding the CUNY Assistive Technology Services, also known as CATS, the Center for Online Learning, the Academic Center for Excellence in Research and Teaching, also known as ACCERT, and some information on universal design. Again, these slides will be posted to our website, so please feel free to take advantage of these resources. We've reached the end of our session recap. For any additional questions, please reach out to our office. Our contact information can be found on this slide and on our website. Thank you so much for your time.